Good day. I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. The title of this episode is The End of Oil, and this is episode 14, recorded on October 25th, 2024. There will be a follow-on to this episode about the end of coal and gas. So in total, this episode and the next will be about the end of fossil fuels. Um, so This, just to recap what this channel is about, I'm trying to give you information that would help you understand better the situation that we're in as a human race and individually after 250 years of doubling our consumption every 22 years or so. Our current situation as we come near to the end of that exponential growth, or perhaps we're already at the end of multiplying our consumption, um, and then what to expect from the future and how to prepare yourself and your family for the future. So this is really a kind of prepping channel, how to get ready for the next century, the next 2 centuries, what's likely to pay off and what won't pay off, how to what gives you the best chances of making sure that you'll have grandchildren and they'll have grandchildren, and what will reduce your chances of that. Um, so I'm not talking about prepping for a crisis that will happen overnight. More, we're in the midst of something that's already started, and how will it turn out, and what you could do to give yourself the best chances and your family. Um, So to review where we were in the last episodes, we were talking about how much energy we have and how we spend it, how much we get each year and how much we spend it. And 90% of our, if you leave out the stuff that we grow, the food, the fodder, and the lumber, then we have about 46,000, 47,000 calories from other sources. And 90% of that energy is from coal, oil, and gas, what we call the fossil fuels. And almost none of it, just 10%, is from other sources like wind and solar and hydro and nuclear. Um, so, um, and a specific concern that we should have is, are we going to continue to be able to use 46,000 calories of these? In fact, are we right now we get around I think 42,000 of calories per person per day of coal, oil, and gas, and will we be able to continue that, or if we want to continue to double our consumption every 25, 22 years, are we going to be able to double the amount of coal, oil, and gas, or will it will we have to maintain it at this level, or eventually have to decrease it? So that's what this episode and the next episode are about, is what can we expect of our supply of coal, oil, and gas. Now, of the 90%, coal, oil, and gas supply 90% of our consumption, and of that, it's oil is slightly ahead. It's 16,500 calories per person per day. And the next is coal, 13,800. And next is gas, 12,100. So they're more or less equal, but oil's a little bit ahead of gas and coal. So can we consume more? Can we maintain the consumption level that we're at? Or are we going to run out? And if we run out, when are we going to run out? Those are some of the basic questions we can ask. I'm not going to talk about should we use more or maintain or use less coal, oil, and gas. There's an awful lot of talk about that, about green energy, about climate warming, climate change, global warming, and I don't think it's relevant to our affairs, because the fact is that we are going on multiplying our consumption year on year, decade after decade, regardless of what people say about risks to the environment. As I already said this in an earlier episode, I don't think that what we think about what we should do is influencing us very much. Instead, if there is a limit to our use of coal, oil, and gas, it'll be something that happens to us. It won't be a choice that we make. It'll be something about the world around us that will limit our use of coal, oil, and gas. Because we, regardless of how much we talk about, and regardless of whether you believe in climate change and global warming, the fact is we're still multiplying. And we also can't imagine a world where we don't have a little more of everything every year, where our children don't have a lot more of everything than we did. And where our universities, our governments, our cities and so on haven't expanded their economies and their and every other measure of success and wealth. That doesn't look like success to us, and doesn't look like a world worth living in. So we always want to be expanding everything. As long as we want that, we aren't going to be able to stop consuming more and more fuel. Now, the first answer is an easy answer. Of course, there's a hard limit to how much coal, oil, and gas we can use, and because there's a finite amount of it underneath our feet. Who knows how much, but there's a finite. You could go if you had X-ray vision and you could see through the planet. You could count how much coal, oil, and gas there is underneath us, and that's how much there is, and that's the maximum that anybody could ever get out of this planet. Some people talk about saying the planet is continuously generating some more. Regardless of whether that's true or not, I doubt that even if it's true, it won't be adding much to the amount of coal, oil, and gas there is on offer. But regardless, it's this limit of the amount underneath our feet is not the real limit we need to worry about. We'll never use all that coal, oil, and gas. We'll never mine it. We'll never pump it. We'll never drill it. Okay, we'll never meet that limit because there are other limits that come first. So today, for example, we have a total of 14 mines worldwide that are deeper than 3 kilometers. The Earth's crust goes down a lot deeper than 3 kilometers, and so there's a lot more to mine. Okay, but a total of 14 mines. 13 of them are for gold and uranium, and one of them is for copper. And you might ask yourself, why are there only 14 mines that go down to 3 kilometers when there's an awful lot of stuff deeper than that? Or even, why do we prefer surface mines, open pit mines? And why do we hate deeper and deeper mines? And it's because it's expensive, risky, dangerous, and so on. There's all sorts of reasons, and it's not just the depth of the mine. There's all sorts of pros and cons you can think about any particular mining effort or drilling effort, and endless questions, and these are mulled over by the press and by governments, by investors, by people living around there, and we go over and over them again and again as we make decisions about where to drill, when to drill, what to mine, and how to mine. And there's all sorts of minerals and coal, oil, and gas specifically that we leave underground because we just don't see any benefit I mean, the burdens and the difficulties and the expenses would outweigh any benefit we could get. And that, one way of saying that is that somebody can't make a profit on it. And the amount that we are willing to pump and mine is an extremely small fraction of the amount underground. So the real question is not how much there is underground, how much coal, oil, and gas there is. It's how much will we leave in the ground, and how much are we willing to get. And again, I want to emphasize that the real question is how much are you willing to extend yourself, to how much effort are you willing, how much risk are you willing to take, how much environmental damage can you accept, whatever, and not just you, but all the people involved, the governments, the investors, the local landowners, and the people downwind from the coal plant. How much, what are we willing to live with? And because every mining effort, every bit of coal, oil, and gas has some expense, and the answer to that really depends on the society, the world society and the local society, how their life is. So I want to talk a little bit about what life was like until our exponential growth began, or sometime in the last 250 years. At that time, if you look how people spent their time and their energy, they used it to get more energy, to get energy from the land. And they wanted to get food, they wanted to get shelter that wasn't freezing cold, and they wanted clothing. Those are the three basics, and they spent most of their time trying to get those three things, and everyone struggled to get those things. The person who consistently had enough food was a well-off person, maybe a royalty. A person who ordinary people from time to time, and their families from time to time, struggled to make ends meet. And I'm not talking about having enough gas for your gas tank. I'm talking about having enough food to put on your table, being able to keep your children in a warm house, or at least one that's not freezing. And that's where almost all of the human race's efforts went, was to obtain the energy that was required to get these things done. And in that context of everyone struggling to get energy in one form or another, in wood or in crops or in clothing, coal was, at least for some purposes, almost free compared to the amount of work that you'd need to do to get a comparable amount of energy from the land. So a poor coal, you dig there are different grades of coal, and a poor coal has the same calorie content as a loaf of bread. A high-grade coal has a calorie content that's roughly the same as cooking oil. And you could just dig, if you found some, you could just dig it out, and then there would be ready to serve you, and you didn't have to plant a seed and hope that pests didn't kill it, and you didn't have to go to all the trouble that you do when you're farming and so on. It was almost free if you could find some. And in a world where everybody's struggling to get the energy embodied in food required to build a house and in clothing, coal's a godsend. It has a direct impact on people's survival and on family survival. It can make the difference between a family member living and dying. And so in that context, when a society spends most of its efforts just on staying alive, it's likely to mine and drill as much as it can. It'll do whatever it can to get the coal or oil or gas. Now, today we live in a much different arrangement. Um, we're much more grudging about mining anything. We're much more selective and restrict ourselves a lot more. And we're leaving a lot more of everything in the ground than our ancestors would have. For instance, we prefer coal seams where there's 60 meters thick from top to bottom of coal, and where there's not too much ground, not too much burden, in other words, non-coal material above the coal, so we can strip mine. We can just tear off whatever's on top of that seam, and then we take this huge machine, like it looks like you're in a science fiction movie. It's like a skyscraper, and you turn this big machine loose on the coal bed, and the coal bed stretches on for 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, or much more, and you just keep extracting the coal using this huge digging machine and pouring it into gargantuan trucks and sending it off on the railroad. That's the kind of coal mine we like, and with this kind of coal mine, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, one worker can mine using all this machinery 2/3 of a million tons in a year or something like that. Some enormous amount using these huge machines. And but you can imagine that most coal seams are not 60 meters thick. If we're only interested in the 60-meter coal seams, that means that most of the coal in the world is just not worth it to us. There's also other things, like we don't want coal with too much sulfur in it. We're willing to let a coal seam be partitioned between different owners, and some owners may keep it to themselves and not sell it at all, and there may be zoning risk. Anyway, we may not even use a coal seam fully, even if it's this 60-meter coal seam. So that's our current. That's contrasting the past, where we'd essentially take all the coal we could get, or if we had known how to pump oil, we would have taken all the oil we could get. And now we're extremely selective. So it's only if we talk about the context of what our society is like, only if we say this is, in this particular society, the world as it is now, that we can start to answer the question of how much are we going to leave in the ground, and how much are we going to drill and pump and mine. So I just want to talk in a few facts, just tell a few facts about our situation that I think describe roughly where we are, and I can say as long as we remain at this status quo, we can talk about how much we're likely to leave in the ground, and how much and when we're going to run out. Okay? So right now, out of all the energy that we use, about 1/6 of the energy that human race uses goes to mining and drilling and refining oil and all the things that happen along the way, from taking whatever's in the ground and turning it into to energy that we like into electricity. In other words, out of every 6 calories, maybe one of them, or around one of them, goes to all this process of extracting the coal, oil, and gas and using it. But on the other hand, our pricing sets a very steep discount on that. We don't price it. We don't price energy at 1/6 of our spending. We actually only spend about 1/20th of our money on coal, oil, and gas. Um, so we've decided to value other things so much that somehow energy takes a back seat, and we're almost giving it away. It may feel like a little expensive when you go to the gas station and you fill up your car, but compared to the amount of energy that we actually have to spend to get that gas, um, you're actually spending a fraction of you're spending your monthly, your yearly budget. In the world's yearly budget for energy is about 5% of our total spending. We spend our money elsewhere, whereas, or 1/20th, whereas 1/6 of our energy is actually going into getting more energy. That's a discount. Um, and then one more fact. Right now, the last decades, oil has generally ranged from $60 a barrel to $140 a barrel. That's in 2023 dollars. And when it goes much above 140, when there's a spike, we seem to have a risk of an economic crisis. For instance, there was a spike in oil prices around 2008, and then there was a huge economic crisis. That economic crisis, you may have heard, had something to do with mortgages in the United States, but also had to do with oil. And so I'd say as long as, so I'll say for the rest of this discussion about when we're going to run out of coal, oil, and gas, I'll be doing that within the framework of a society like ours, where we're spending only 1/6 of our energy to get more energy, where we spend 1/20th of our money on getting energy, and where oil is between $60 and $140 a barrel, like it has been for decades now. So I can't talk about what would happen if our society changed fundamentally. For instance, if we went back to how things were 250 years ago and spent 2/3 of our money on obtaining energy in different forms, like a typical household might have spent half or more of their money just on obtaining food. In a situation where energy is that hard to come by and that expensive, our ideas of what we're willing to mine and pump may change a lot. Okay, so, or if the price of coal, oil, and gas multiplied by 3 or by 10, so that the cost of right now the cost of a gallon of oil in the United States might be between $2 and $4. If suddenly it was $20, then things would change. The ball game would be a different one. But I'm going to assume that we're still in a world like ours, where energy is not the top thing on our plate, where it's not our primary worry, where we can sort of put it in the background and think about other priorities for our efforts and our spending most of the time. So I'm going to go on and talk about oil today, and then I'll talk about gas and coal in the next episode. But first I want to say a few words about what happens when we do meet a limit, say, of oil, and oil begins to our willingness. So at some point, oil becomes so difficult to obtain that that we won't be willing to go to the effort to spend enough money to get all that oil, to get as much oil, and we'll start reducing our oil consumption. So we'll have a choice between whether to work harder and spend more of our budget for the oil, or whether to use less oil. Same thing with coal and with gas. It always comes down to that thing: are we willing to change our society fundamentally so that we're willing to lay out a large fraction of our time and resources and money in order to get coal, gas, and oil? Or are we, and that would be a different society, or are we going to stick with the status quo and just do with less? Okay, so let's talk about doing with less and staying sort of with the status quo. And if we start saying, okay, well, I'm just not willing to spend $20 a gallon at the gas station, uh, in other words, 5 or 10 times more what we're spending today, and so I just say, okay, well, I'll do without the car, or I'll only drive it on Sundays. Okay. Um, so what can we expect in this situation where the amount of gas decreases, and coal and oil, when these start to decrease our supply? It's not exactly that we're running out, it's just that we're not willing to go to the effort to obtain as much as we have now. Um, so because they're harder to get, they will be harder to get. Um, well, first of all, I want to say people sort of imagine that that we'll run out. In fact, we'll run out of these things. In fact, I titled this episode "The End of Oil," as if one year we'll have oil and the next year we won't. That's not the way it'll happen. Um, Instead, we've doubled our consumption of energy roughly every 22 years. And we can expect, the reasons for that is because, it takes organization, machinery, manpower. You start up some mines, and they run for they're open for 20 years or for 100 years, and then they close. And all the incidents that happen along the way of each mine, and every oil well, every gas well worldwide, and that all of these minute and details add up to have added up to a doubling time of around 22 years. And we can expect that similarly, when oil starts to decrease, it'll decrease at a similar rate. That it'll decrease. It may divide by 2 in 20 years or 30 years, and then divide by 2 again. But I'm just saying it won't happen overnight. It won't happen in a year. There will be crashes and rebounds. Okay, but those have to do with, not because of a limit of running out of oil. They have to do with people and the way that we organize ourselves, the way we buy and sell things, the way we corner a market, or have panics, or make miscalculations. Then there will be times of scarcity and times when it seems like we're back in business. But overall, over 20 or 30 years, we'll see it. Once oil finally begins to decrease, it'll divide by 2 in about the same time that it's taken to multiply by 2 in the past. Well, actually, oil for a while was multiplying by 2 every 10 years or so, while the rest, while coal. This was during the first from 1910 until 1970 or so. So at that time, oil was. At the start of the century, most of our energy was coming from coal, and then oil and gas became more and more important because they were growing and growing faster than coal was. So you could argue about whether oil itself will divide in 20 or 30 years, like our total energy consumption, or whether it will divide in 10 years as it did, comparing the same way that it was multiplying every 10 years. So I don't know. I'd say, just to be safe, I'd say every 20 years or so. And our total energy from fossil fuels, from coal, oil, and gas, might divide every 20 years. But another thing for sure is that when you leave while you're doing exponential growth, while you're multiplying by 2 every 22 years, things are pretty predictable. But when you stop doing exponential growth, they get much less predictable. Um, so you'll have these crashes and rebounds and so on. Now we won't ever completely run out of coal, oil, and gas. We may divide uh, by 4 or by 10. Maybe if you divide by 2 and divide by 2 again, then and maybe one more time, then after 100 years you might be down to 1/10 the amount of coal, oil, and gas that you start that the peak amount. But at some point it'll sort of level out. With minerals, things that we get out of the ground, we never seem to run out. We've been very interested in gold and diamonds for thousands of years, and we're still mining them. We're still getting more every year. There's always more to get if you're willing to spend more money for it. So I don't think we'll ever completely stop with coal and gas. It's just that there will be less of it, and it'll be more expensive. So let's get to oil. Um, Oil today, we use 16,500 calories per day as of 2023. Now, there are 4 kinds of oil. Oil basically means anything liquid that you get out of the ground. Coal is the solids. Gas is the gases. So the liquids. Today, 65% of our oil supply is what's called easy oil. This is the stuff that you might also call it crude oil. It's the stuff that we get out of underground lakes. So you just drill a hole. At first some of it will spread out on its own, and then you pump the rest. Then there's another 20%, or about 3,000 calories per person per day, that's called natural gas liquids. That means you drill a well for natural gas, and while you're getting out the natural gas, you're also getting with it stuff that easily turns into a liquid. Maybe as soon as it comes out of the wellhead, it turns into a liquid, or maybe you have to do a little bit of processing, but not much, and you get a liquid. Which liquids? There's butane, there's propane, there's LPG, there's probably other things, and we use those. We mix them into our fuels, like into our vehicle fuels. We use them for heating. We also use them for plastic and rubber to make those things. But that's about 20%, 1/5 of our total oil supply. Another 9%, 1,500 calories, is fracked oil from the United States, where we have this. The United States has developed a technique for fracturing the rock underneath, and once it's fractured, they can get less than 1/10 of the oil that's in that rock out. And then another 6% is from oil sands in Canada and Venezuela. Some of the oil sands are above ground, and so you strip mine them. They're basically sand inside of something a lot like tar, and then you do something with the heat up the sand and the tar and get out the tarry stuff and turn it into oil. But most of it's deep underground, and you can't do that. Instead, you make you drill 2 wells in the ground about 2 meters apart, I think. One you inject really hot water, and it melts the tarry stuff. And then the tarry stuff, some of it, less than 1/10, flows to the other well, and you pump that out. And you have to do an awful lot of processing, because this tarry stuff, the oil from the oil sands, isn't anything like what you would want to use in a car. So I want to talk about a little bit of history of these. So you have 2/3 easy oil, crude oil. You have 1/5, 20% from natural gas wells. You have another 9%, 1,500 calories from fracked oil, and another 1,000 calories from oil sands. Now, until 2005, 20 years ago, Almost all of our oil supply was the easy oil and the natural gas liquids. Um, and the fracked oil and the oil sands have only been very recent. Let's talk about history. Uh, in 1965, our discoveries of new oil reservoirs began to decrease. We had been discovering more and more every year, and then in 1965 we just stopped finding. We were still finding more, but not as fast as we used to. Then, in 20 years later, with our discoveries decreasing and our consumption always increasing, in 1985 they matched. In 1985, we were consuming more oil every year than we were discovering. Actually, they were about the same in 1985, and since then, we're now discovering a lot less than we consume. 20 years later, 2005, the easy oil, the crude oil, the amount we were pumping every year plateaued. It leveled out. It hasn't been increasing since 2005. There are individual, like if you look at the amount of oil coming from individual countries, you'll see that many countries already plateaued and then decreased long before 2005, and other ones plateaued and decreased after 2005. But taking the world as a whole, we met our limit for easy oil in 2005, and since then we've been for 20 years producing about the same amount of crude oil every year. Now, since then, because we always want to get more energy every year, we've been willing to spend more money on getting more energy every year. So our investments in discovering and obtaining, drilling and obtaining more oil multiplied by 4. We now spend between 500 and 800 billion dollars per year worldwide on finding more oil and developing oil fields, which is around 4 times what it was. We're spending an awful lot more in our actual amount of oil that we produce. The increase in the amount of oil that we produce since 2005 has been nothing like a factor of 4 multiplication. It's been more like a 15% addition, okay? Even though we're spending around 4 times more. Where did we get the extra oil? Well, we are pumping more natural gas, and so we get almost twice as much liquids from our natural gas wells. We're also fracking, which we didn't do before 2005, and we're also mining oil sands. All of these things, the fracking, the oil sands, and the natural gas wells, all of them are expensive, some more than expensive than others. Now, as of today, from 2012 until today, our oil discoveries have ranged from 2,000 to 5,000 calories per person per day. Meanwhile, right now our consumption is 16,000 calories per person per day, so we're consuming, depending on the year, how much we discover in a year. If we discover 5,000 calories in a year, we're consuming 3 times as much as we discovered. But some years it's less. Sometimes we discover only 2,000, and then we've consumed 8 times as much as we've discovered. And so the writing's on the wall. Clearly, someday we're not going to be able to get as much oil out of the ground in a given year. So right now, I want to give a short scorecard or summary of where things are. And right now, easy oil is at its limit, and it has been at its limit for 20 years, and it's likely to start decreasing very soon now. It could be next year, it could be in 10 years, but it may be hard to tell, because easy oil is a strategic resource. Some countries depend on it pretty much entirely for their economy, uh, but every country depends on it very strongly, and so it's a matter of state secrets. There are all kinds of details about how much oil is still in the ground, and who has how much difficulty getting oil out of the ground, and how fast they can produce it. All of these things are a matter of state secrets, and so it may take some time to notice for it to become very clear to the world in general that the amount of oil, of easy oil on offer, is decreasing. Um, it also may be that the reason why it's been at a plateau for 20 years is because of certain countries noticing that that they were very close to the limit and just deciding that to rein in the amount of oil that they were producing, and so they'd be able to produce it over more years. Um, it's a matter of it's a very strategic and often cloak and dagger sort of thing. Um, there are plenty of public statistics, and also ones that you can buy from consulting agencies if you spend enough money. Um, and like one of them is called Rystad, Rystad. Um, but there are some questions behind every single one of them about the reliability of all the details. So I'm not going to get into it. I'm just saying it looks like since it's been at its limit for 20 years, it must start decreasing sometime soon here, and soon could be this year. Next up, the liquids we get out of natural gas wells. Well, there's still a lot of gas underground. We haven't met the limit of gas, and probably we could even double our gas production worldwide. But right now it's only supplying 20% of our oil, these liquids. So if we were to lose the 65% of easy oil, there's no way that gas could make up the difference. So it can be a substitute if our gas supply decreases a bit, say 10%, but it can't substitute for a large decrease in gas, which will happen sooner or later. Next up, and by the way, gas is expensive because as soon as it comes out of the wellhead, you have to put in a pipe and then you have to store it somewhere. So it's a harder proposition to justify than pumping gas. Next up on the scorecard is the fracked oil from the United States. In general, oil fracking it takes a lot of work and a lot of equipment. It's very expensive and it's risky. So because it's harder to make a profit on fracked oil than on easy oil, and that makes it riskier. It requires a bigger investment. Also, in the United States was kind of a perfect environment for fracked oil. They had all sorts of resources ready to go. The U.S. had been pumping oil in large quantities for a century, and it had a great pipeline. When you frack oil, often you get gas out of the well too, and you want to do something with the gas. And so, another thing to know about fracked oil is that once you drill a fracked oil well, you get almost all of the oil out in the first 2 years because it's just you're getting only the oil out that leaks out of the cracks in the rock. So first 2 years and it's over. So, and then the U.S. was all ready to go, and so by 2012, in 2012 alone, the United States drilled 45,000 new wells, which is 6 times what the worldwide drilling was during the same year. It was a hothouse environment for United States fracked oil, and that also means that the United States basically maxed out its oil production capacity already. It's already somewhere near or at its limit. In fact, there's speculation about whether United States fracked oil will start decreasing sometime soon. But we knew what to do once we had the technology. We had huge amounts of equipment, easy money, low interest rates, and government support, and everything was ready. As for the rest of the world, the rest of the world doesn't have all the things that you want in order to make a profit on fracked oil. There's very little fracking being done elsewhere, and it's hard to see whether it will ever be profitable. You have to be able to rely on gas prices being high and staying high. Otherwise, whenever they come down, all the fracking companies will go out of business. So it's hard to see that there's a lot of oil that could be fracked around the world outside of the United States. It's not like the United States is some special geology, but it's hard to see how any other country in the world could make a profit or not stand a huge loss on fracking. And so natural gas liquids are expensive. Fracked oil is very expensive and risky and probably restricted to the United States. And oil sands are extremely expensive. And if you took all of the world's oil sands that we know about and you got all the oil out of them, that would still supply the world's oil, all of the world's oil, for only 10 years. So it's not like we start really using our oil sands and then suddenly have a century of oil or whatever. It's a supplement. And it's also so expensive that we really don't want to use it. It's hard to make any sort of profit on it. So the bottom line on oil, and here I'm wrapping up, is that easy oil is at its limit. It will probably start its decrease within 10 years. This is 2025 right now, and but it'll be a matter of there will be a lot of state secrets involved in manipulation of the market, so it may be hard to tell. Other oils, the stuff that comes from natural gas wells, the fracked oil and the oil sands, they can fill the gap for a while, and maybe they could supply 20% more of our current oil consumption. Okay, but once easy oil divides by 2, then they won't be able to make up the gap. So easy oil will decrease, and then as I discussed earlier, we've been multiplying our oil and our energy consumption every 22 years or so we can expect our energy consumption to go down. Divide by 2 roughly every 22 years or so. Could be more, could be 30. Maybe it could be even faster because we did ramp up our oil consumption a lot faster than that. So maybe our oil will run out faster than that. Maybe it'll divide by 2 in 10 years once it starts dividing. I don't know. But by the time of the first division by 2 of easy oil, we'll find that our total oil is decreasing. Because no matter how much we spend, we're already spending fortunes every year on trying to develop the oil sands and the fracked oil and so on. No matter how much we spend, we just won't be able to make up the difference once easy oil starts running out. Seriously, not exactly running out. There always will be some easy oil available, but there will just be less of it. It'll be harder to get, more expensive, and higher demand. So we can expect that within 20 or 30 years, the total amount of oil available to the human race will have begun to decrease. Maybe sooner, but I don't think any longer than 20 or 30 years. It's already a miracle, I think, or it's a lot of manipulation from certain states that easy oil has stayed at its peak for 20 years. That's not the way that peaks usually work. So what I'm saying basically is that we're already at oil's limit. We might be able to, in the meantime, before we might still, with more natural gas wells, we might be able to increase our oil by another 10 or 20% before we finally hit the peak. But sometime in the next 20 or 30 years we'll be at the peak, and then we'll start dividing. We're already almost there. So in the next episode we'll talk about natural gas and about coal, and that'll be a much shorter discussion, but I think this is a good place to wrap up for today. And I hope the main message here is that sooner or later, and we're talking within the next generation, we'll have less oil, and then in the next generations after that, less gas and less coal. And so sooner or later and then the total quantity will sooner or later divide by 2 and then by 4, and then we'll have to think about what to do without the amounts that we have today. And regardless of what we say about global warming and so on. And also, as for multiplying by 2 or continuing our exponential growth, multiplying by 2 or by 4, that seems really out of the question. Anyway, thank you for your attention, and keep coming back. Keep coming back.